The most fearless man I know called me with pure terror in his voice. He told me about a cave that drove every previous agent to madness and suicide, their last words filled with whispers of faces in the walls and songs that peel the skin from your mind. I was sent in alone, not to fight a monster of flesh and blood, but a horror that weaponizes your deepest regrets and wears the wrong face. This is the story of that mission and how my victory became the trigger for the end of the world. The last gasp of the Strigoi was a wet, pathetic rattle. It gurgled on the consecrated silver I'd left buried in its throat, black ichor bubbling over its lips and staining the pristine marble of the Romanian monastery's floors. Its claws, which had been seconds from peeling the face off a terrified young novice, went limp. The air, thick with the coppery tang of blood and the sharp scent of burnt sulfur from my shotgun shells, began to settle. Another Tuesday. I wiped my blade on the creature's tattered robes, the ancient fabric crumbling to dust under the pressure. My job wasn't about glory or righteous fury. It was about sanitation. I was a janitor for a world that refused to believe in the filth that festered in its dark corners. We, the few who worked under the gilded cross of the Vatican's Division of Clandestine Affairs, were the ones who cleaned it up. My comm unit, a sleek black device built into my gauntlet, chimed softly. I expected a routine extraction confirmation. Instead, the voice that crackled to life was one that never betrayed an ounce of pressure. Until now. Phoenix? Status? It was Cardinal Alaric. My handler, my superior, and a man I'd once seen face down a chattering demon of the Sixth Circle without so much as blinking. His voice was the bedrock of our order, calm, absolute, eternal. But today, it was different. There was a faint tremor, a brittle edge to his words that I had never heard before. It was the sound of a crack forming in a mountain. "Target neutralized, Eminence," I reported, my own voice a low monotone. I kept my eyes on the dissolving corpse, awaiting exfil. There was a pause, longer than usual. I could hear his breathing, shallow and tight. "Change of plans, Phoenix. Forget exfil. We have a priority transport en route to your position. ETA is 10 minutes. You're coming to Rome, immediately." That was the moment a cold knot formed in my gut. I didn't get summoned to the sanctum. Field operatives like me stayed in the field. The sanctum was the heart, the brain. Bringing me there mid-mission was like a surgeon abandoning a patient to go consult a textbook he'd already memorized. Something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. "Understood," was all I said. The flight was sterile and silent, a black, unmarked jet that sliced through the night sky without a whisper. I didn't sleep. I stripped and cleaned my weapons, the familiar ritual, a small anchor in a suddenly turbulent sea. An hour later, we were descending over Rome, landing not at a public airport, but on a private strip that officially didn't exist. The sanctum itself is hidden in plain sight, deep in the bedrock beneath a quiet, unassuming rectory a stone's throw from the Vatican. I entered through a confessional booth, the wood panel sliding away to reveal a titanium door and a retinal scanner. The air immediately changed, the scent of old incense and wax giving way to the cool, metallic smell of ozone, gun oil, and ancient stone. The base is a paradox, a fusion of two warring eras. Monks in humble brown robes glided past operators in black tactical gear, who were field stripping assault rifles on thousand-year-old oak tables. Blessed swords and crusader armor rested in climate-controlled glass cases, their steel gleaming under the cold, modern LEDs. It was a place where faith and firepower were one and the same. I found Cardinal Alaric in the central briefing chamber, a circular room walled with dark, soundproofed stone. He stood before a holographic map of the world, but his attention wasn't on the flickering lights. He was just staring. Alaric was a man carved from old, hard wood, his face a testament to a life spent staring into the abyss. But tonight, the abyss had stared back. The usual lines of age and authority around his eyes were deeper, and they weren't alone. New, finer lines webbed their corners, carved not by time but by a terror that was still raw. When he turned to face me, I saw it plainly, a profound, naked fear in the eyes of the most fearless man I knew. He clasped his hands behind his back, a familiar gesture that failed to hide their slight tremble. "Phoenix," he began, his voice low and strained. "For 30 years I have dispatched agents to face the horrors of the pit. We have fought demons, specters, things that whisper promises from forgotten tombs. We have contained curses that can rot a city from the inside out. We thought we had categorized the darkness." He took a shaky breath. "We were arrogant fools." He gestured to a file on the steel table between us. I didn't move to take it. I just watched him, the knot in my stomach tightening. "We have a situation. A new one. Something that doesn't fit our taxonomies." He looked me dead in the eye, and the fear in his gaze was so potent it felt like a physical force. "We have sent 3 teams. Special forces, inquisitors, even a psychic null. We have 12 survivors. Or, we had 12. Every single one of them, without fail, took their own life within 24 hours of extraction." My blood ran cold. Alaric leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, horrified whisper. "Their final testimonies, they were fragmented, mad, but consistent. They didn't speak of monsters that clawed or bit. They spoke of violations, of seeing familiar faces in the walls, stretching the stone like skin. They spoke of a song that didn't enter their ears, but bloomed inside their skulls, a melody that peeled the very skin from their mind. They said reality itself was the enemy." He finally broke eye contact, looking away as if the memory was too painful to hold. One of them, a hardened soldier, just sat in a corner and clawed at his own eyes, whispering the same thing over and over before he ended it. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Alaric looked back at me, his face a mask of utter despair. He said, "It's wearing the wrong face." The words hung in the chilling silence of the chamber, echoing in my head. "It's wearing the wrong face." A simple sentence, yet it carried a weight that threatened to buckle the very foundations of this ancient room. My gaze drifted from Alaric's haunted expression to the dark, polished obsidian of the briefing table between us. It was a slab of night, and for a moment I could almost see a distorted visage staring back from its depths. Alaric seemed to follow my gaze, then slid a single, high-gloss photograph across the surface. "This is where it began," he said, his voice raspy. "The Judean desert. An Israeli geological survey team stumbled upon it 3 weeks ago." I picked it up. The photo depicted a jagged hillside, bleached by a relentless sun. In the center was the cave, less an entrance and more of a wound in the rock. A dark, vertical gash that looked utterly unnatural, as if the world had been sliced open and left to bleed shadow. But it was the patterns around the opening that seized my attention. They weren't chiseled or painted, they looked organic. Like fossilized veins or the sprawling, chaotic patterns of a fungus, they spread across the rock face. It was a script of pure wrongness, a language that felt actively hostile to the human eye. I tried to focus on a single character, to trace its shape and find some kind of logic. As I did, a wave of intense vertigo washed over me. The air in my lungs felt thick and heavy, and a sour taste flooded the back of my throat. The symbols at the edge of my vision seemed to squirm, to writhe with a life of their own like a nest of worms disturbed by the light. I felt an overpowering certainty that if I looked away and then looked back, they would have rearranged themselves. My hand trembled slightly as I set the photograph back down on the table, taking a slow, steadying breath to fight the nausea. "I see you feel it," Alaric said, a grim understanding in his eyes. "That's just a photograph, a two-dimensional image. Imagine standing before it. Imagine walking past it." He didn't need to elaborate. The quiet, dread coiling in my gut was doing that for him. "The survivors," I prompted, my voice low and tight. Alaric's shoulders slumped, the weight of 12 broken souls pressing down on him. Their testimonies were chillingly consistent, he recounted, pacing slowly. They spoke of the architecture of the place first. They'd enter a tunnel that would curve back on itself, but instead of returning them to where they started, it would open into a completely new chamber. They described walking down a level corridor only to find themselves suddenly standing on the ceiling, with the floor above them. Passages that were there one moment would be solid rock the next. He paused, turning back to me. This wasn't just a maze, Phoenix. It was a place that actively rejected the laws of physics. It toyed with them, separated them, broke their sense of direction until they couldn't trust the ground beneath their own feet. Then he got to the heart of it. And then there were the inhabitants. The things with the wrong faces. One man swore he saw his daughter, but her eyes were on her cheeks. Another described seeing his long-dead father's face, only the skin was stretched too tight over the wrong bone structure. A grotesque parody that smiled with a mouth that didn't move quite right. They weren't just wearing masks. It was as if they had scooped out a person's identity and were wearing it like a wet, ill-fitting coat. I felt a phantom itch across my own skin. But the most terrifying part for all of them, Alaric continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, was the awareness. They all reported a pervasive, crushing sense of being watched, not by a creature lurking in the dark, but by the cave itself. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, expectant. The very air, they said, was conscious and malevolent. They weren't being hunted by something in the cave. They felt they were being digested by the place itself. He finally stopped pacing and leaned on the table, his knuckles white. The fear on his face was now mixed with a desperate, pleading frustration. Do you understand, Phoenix? This thing, whatever it is, it doesn't attack the body. It dismantles the soul. It doesn't kill with claws or teeth. It murders reality. It finds the bedrock of a person's sanity, their memories, their loved ones, their sense of self, and it shatters them. It didn't break their bodies. It unraveled the very fabric of their minds, until the only escape they could find was a bullet. He looked at me, his eyes searching mine for something, a strength, a resolve, an answer he no longer possessed. That is what you are going up against. Not a monster of flesh and blood, but a horror that weaponizes perception itself. I stared back at the photograph on the obsidian desk. The dark gash in the hillside seemed to stare back, a void that promised not death, but uncreation. The squirming symbols were already burned into my mind's eye, a stain I knew I'd never be able to wash out. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than any crypt, that I had to walk right through them. My gaze remained fixed on the photograph, on that wound in the world. The nausea had subsided, leaving a cold, hard certainty in its place. This was more than a nest of creatures. It was a cancer on the very fabric of existence. Alaric seemed to read the grim understanding on my face. Before you go, he said, his voice heavy with a pastor's sorrow, there is one more thing you need to hear. This is the last thing we have, the only testament that survived the madness long enough to be recorded. He produced a small, black audio player, its matte surface absorbing the low light of the chamber. He placed it on the obsidian table between us. It looked like a tombstone for a voice. Her name was Lena Petrova, Alaric explained quietly, a journalist. She went in with the third team, against our counsel, insisting on documenting the quote-quote archaeological anomaly. She was a professional, used to war zones and disaster sites. We thought her objectivity might be an asset. He shook his head slowly. Objectivity is meaningless when the threat refuses to be an object. His thumb hovered over the play button, a moment of profound hesitation. He was about to uncork a bottle of pure poison, and he knew it. Finally, with a deep, shaky breath, he pressed it. A hiss of static filled the room, followed by the ragged, desperate sound of someone gasping for air. Then, her voice. It was thin, frayed at the edges, and trembling with a terror so profound it felt ancient. Recording, I don't know if time doesn't work right in here. Lena's voice was a frantic whisper. They said it was a geological find. that the symbols were pre-Babylonian. They were wrong. The symbols are alive. God, they're still moving. There was a choked sob, then a sharp intake of breath. But that's not it. That's not the real horror. A long pause, filled only with the sound of her own shuddering breaths. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped, laced with a new, more intimate kind of dread. "I saw my father," she whispered, and the words sent a spike of ice through my veins. "He died 7 years ago, lung cancer. I was there, I held his hand. But he was here, standing by one of the weeping walls. And he looked at me." Her breathing hitched. "But it wasn't him, not really. The skin was his, yes, but it was stretched too tight, like wet parchment pulled over a frame that was the wrong shape. And his eyes, oh God, his eyes." She broke off, a sound like a stifled scream catching in her throat. One of them was his. It had that same gentle warmth I remembered, the one that always made me feel safe. But the other was a doll's eye. Glassy, fixed, dead. It didn't move. And when it smiled at me, the skin around that dead eye didn't crinkle. It just pulled. I felt a tightening in my own chest, a visceral, empathetic revulsion. I faced down beasts that could tear a man in half, but this was a different violation. This was a defilement of memory, a desecration of love itself. "He spoke to me," Lena continued, her voice cracking. "He used my childhood nickname, Lenochka. And as he did, I heard it. A sound underneath his voice, a low, clicking chatter, like insects in the walls of your skull. A wet popping noise, like leather pulling away from damp wood every time it turned its head. A sound of rearrangement." Her narrative became more fragmented, her panic giving way to a creeping philosophical horror. It's the imperfections that break you. A perfect copy, you could fight that. You could dismiss it. But this is a parody. It takes the things you hold sacred and shows you a warped, broken reflection. It's not trying to fool you, it's trying to show you that nothing is sacred. Then, her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper, a conspiratorial confession of the damned. But the worst part isn't the sounds, it's the silence. The recording held a profound quiet for a few seconds, and in that void, I could feel what she meant. "It's a listening silence," she breathed, her voice now devoid of all hope. "It's heavy, it presses on you. When the chittering stops, and the wrong voices fade, the quiet that's left is aware, it's watching, it's waiting. You can hear your own blood pounding in your ears, hear the frantic beat of your own heart. And you know it can hear it too. It's in those moments you realize the faces are just the lure, the real monster is the place itself." A sudden, sharp gasp, the sound of something clattering to the stone floor. "It's here, it has my mother's face and—" The recording cut out, abruptly, utterly. The silence that Lena had described now filled the room, thick and suffocating. Alaric reached out a trembling hand and switched off the device. He looked 10 years older than he had when I'd walked in. I stood there, the journalist's last words hanging in the air like a death sentence. I finally understood. This wasn't a mission of extermination. I wasn't going in to fight a creature. I was being sent to confront a living, breathing idea of horror, a place that preyed on the very concept of self. And Lena Petrova had just given me the rules of engagement. The flight to Israel was a silent contemplation of Lena Petrova's last words. When I landed, it wasn't to the bustling noise of a forward operating base, but to an oppressive quiet. The Israeli Defense Forces had established a wide cordon, a full kilometer from the hillside, a ring of armored vehicles and tense soldiers whose discipline couldn't quite mask the fear in their hollow eyes. They spoke in low tones, and none of them, I noted, looked directly at the distant anomaly. The air grew colder as I approached on foot, a dry, unnatural chill that had nothing to do with altitude or weather. It was a refrigerated stillness that leached the warmth from my skin. A faint, sickly sweet smell hung in the air, the scent of old rot and the sharp, sterile perfume of a lightning strike. It was the smell of something both dead and charged with a terrible energy. My gear felt heavy, a useless weight of human ingenuity against a foe that didn't play by human rules. My custom-forged blade, my consecrated shotgun shells, the specialized grenades designed to disrupt ethereal forms, they all felt like children's toys. I reached the entrance. The gash in the rock was just as unsettling as it was in the photograph, a hateful wound in the world. The writhing symbols that covered the stone seemed to pulse faintly in my peripheral vision, and the nausea returned, a sour churning in my gut. I didn't linger. I took a deep breath of the tainted air, switched on my headlamp, and stepped across the threshold. The change was instantaneous and absolute. The world behind me vanished. The faint sunlight, the distant hum of the cordon's generators, the very air of the outside world. All of it was gone, sealed away as if by a closing vault door. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light, it consumed it. The powerful beam from my lamp didn't cut through the gloom, it was simply swallowed by it, illuminating only a few feet of damp, veined rock before being devoured. And the silence. Lena was right. It wasn't silence. It was a physical pressure, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound and pressed in on my eardrums. My compass, a reliable old needle floating in its liquid housing, began to spin wildly, a frantic dance of a world that had lost its north. The screen on my gauntlet flickered, displaying static-laced error messages before the display died completely. I was alone, blind and deaf, cut off from everything. I took a step forward, the crunch of my boot on the gravelly floor sounding obscenely loud in the crushing quiet. Then another. I moved deeper into the oppressive black, my hand resting on the smooth polymer grip of my sidearm. That's when I heard it. It wasn't a growl or a footstep. It was a sound from my past, a sound so specific and personal it couldn't possibly be here. The distinct, gritty click-snap of a Zippo lighter being opened. Not just any Zippo, Marco's Zippo. My old partner, dead 5 years, had a nervous habit of flicking it open and shut. I knew its particular sound better than my own heartbeat. The sound came from the darkness just ahead of me. It was a single, clean noise that violated the suffocating silence, a key turning a lock deep inside my memory. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a random hallucination. This was a message. The cave, the entity, whatever it was rifling through my mind, pulling out a sound that meant something to me. It wasn't just watching me, it was reading me. My training kicked in, a lifetime of discipline forcing my panic down. I raised my shotgun, the heavy thud of the pump action, a defiant answer to the whispering quiet. "Show yourself," I said, my voice sounding flat and dead in the sound-dampening space. There was no reply, only that immense, listening silence returning, heavier than before. I advanced, sweeping the pathetic cone of my light from side to side. It fell upon a shape slumped against the wall, then another. It was the last team, 3 of them, clad in the same black tactical gear I wore. They were unmarked, their weapons still holstered, their equipment pristine. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no wounds. But as my light moved upwards and fell upon their faces, I saw the truth. Their faces weren't just gone. They weren't torn off or disfigured. They were erased. Where there should have been eyes, a nose, a mouth, there was only a smooth, slack, unbroken canvas of skin. Like a sculptor's unfinished clay model, their heads were featureless ovals of flesh. The expressions weren't of terror or pain. They were of nothing. An absolute, horrifying absence. The ultimate violation. I stood there in the smothering dark, the click of Marco's lighter echoing in my memory, the sight of the faceless men before me burning into my retinas. The rules were clear now. The enemy was inside my head, and its trophies were the very things that made us human. And I was walking right into its gallery, Leaving the featureless husks of the fallen team behind, I pushed deeper into the suffocating dark. The absolute silence of the entryway began to bleed away, replaced by a sound that was somehow worse. It was a soft, rhythmic tearing, punctuated by a wet, sticky pulling noise. It was an intimate sound, the sound of careful, deliberate work, and it made the hair on my arms stand on end. I followed it, my shotgun held low and ready, my pathetic beam of light cutting a nervous path ahead. The narrow tunnel opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. The air here was thick and humid, heavy with the cloying sweetness of rot I'd smelled outside. My light swept across the scene, and my stomach clenched. I had found their workshop. Dozens of the featureless beings stood or crouched in the gloom, their smooth, blank heads bowed in concentration. In the center of the room, one of them was hunched over another, which lay passively on a flat-topped stone. The working creature held a face. It was pale and slack, its eyes closed, its mouth a faint line. With an unnerving delicacy, it began to apply it to the blank head of its companion. I watched, frozen in horrid fascination, as it smoothed the skin down, pressing it into place with long, pale fingers. I heard that soft, wet tear as the edges settled, the skin stretching to fit the alien contours beneath. The eyelids drooped into place over sockets that held no eyes. It was a masterpiece of desecration. The moment the process was complete, the head of the creature on the stone slab turned towards me. All of them did. In perfect unison, 100 blank faces and one newly stolen one snapped in my direction. The silence was broken by the dry pop of joints as they rose to their full height. Then they attacked. They didn't run or charge. They moved with the unnatural, stuttering gait of a corrupted film reel, a series of frozen, impossible poses linked by blinks of motion. One moment a creature was 30 feet away, its limbs bent at an unnatural angle. The next it was 10 feet closer, its head cocked in a grotesque imitation of curiosity. I opened fire. The roar of the shotgun was a thunderous, defiant profanity in this unholy place. The blast caught the lead creature square in the chest. It didn't explode in a spray of blood and gore. It simply leaked. A thick, oily black fluid, viscous and tar-like, oozed from the wound. And in the dark, shimmering fluid, I saw them. Fleeting, screaming faces, twisting in agony for a split second before dissolving back into the blackness. They were made of stolen souls. I worked the pump, firing again and again, each shot felling a creature only for two more to jerk forward to take its place. They felt no pain, no fear. They were simply a tide of wrongness, and I was being overwhelmed. One of them broke through my barrage. It was faster than the others, its movements smoother, more purposeful. As it cornered me against a weeping stone wall, my light fell fully on its face, and my heart stopped. It was Anya. Her face, exactly as I remembered it from that night, the same dark eyes, the same scar just above her eyebrow. But the skin was too pale, and when her mouth opened to speak, her voice was a horrifying echo, her sweet tone layered over that low, chittering static Lena Petrova had described. "You just watched, Phoenix," she whispered, her voice burrowing into my skull. And just like that, the cave was gone. The thumping bass of a nightclub vibrated through the floor. The air smelled of cheap soap and spilled liquor. I was standing in the doorway of a brightly lit bathroom, the fluorescent bulbs above flickering erratically. Anya was on the floor, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps, her hand outstretched to me. I was just standing there, my feet rooted to the grimy tile, watching her die. "Why aren't you moving?" A voice screamed in my head, her pulse is fading. "You could have saved her. You did nothing. You watched." The guilt was a physical weight, a crushing, absolute certainty that I was a coward, a failure. It was more real than any memory I had. I felt a cold pressure on my shoulder, a phantom touch, but it was enough. It was an anchor to the real horror. The grip was cold, inhuman. The floor wasn't grimy tile. It was damp, cold stone. The air didn't smell of soap. It smelled of decay. This isn't real. The thought was a pinprick of light in the suffocating darkness of the false memory. I fought against the tide of shame, focusing on the cold pressure, on the chittering sound that was trying to hide beneath Anya's voice. "That's not how it happened," I snarled, the words tearing from my throat. The illusion shattered. The club bathroom dissolved back into the nightmarish chamber. The creature wearing Anya's face was inches from me, its long fingers digging into my shoulder. Its expression wasn't Anya's anymore. It was a rictus of rage and frustration. The stolen face began to peel away at the edges, revealing the smooth, featureless head beneath. With a roar of pure adrenaline, I drove the butt of my shotgun into its head. The blank skull cracked with a sound like breaking pottery. It collapsed, its oily lifeblood pooling on the floor, the faces within it screaming their silent release. I stumbled back, gasping for air, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was alive. I had survived. But I was shaking uncontrollably, the ghost of a guilt that wasn't mine still clinging to me like a shroud. I had won the battle, but not before the enemy had shown me exactly how it planned to win the war, by turning my own soul against me. The oily black fluid from the fallen creatures didn't soak into the stone floor. It seemed to retreat, evaporating into a greasy haze that left behind no trace, except for the lingering phantom guilt coiling in my gut. Shaking off the last dregs of the psychic assault, I pressed on, my boots leaving no footprints on the strangely sterile ground. The passage ahead narrowed, but the oppressive atmosphere changed. The intimate, wet sounds of the workshop faded, replaced by a low, resonant thrumming. It was a vibration that didn't travel through the air but up through the soles of my boots, a deep, primal heartbeat that seemed to emanate from the very core of this cursed place. I emerged into a space that was a blasphemy against geometry. It wasn't a chamber, it was an impossibility. The scale was dizzying, designed to unhinge the mind. The far wall seemed a mile away, yet I could see the minute details of its veined surface as if it were within arm's reach. The ceiling curved down in a sweeping, illogical arc to become the floor I was standing on, while pathways spiraled away in directions that defied gravity. The symbols were here too, not just carved into the stone but seemingly alive. They pulsed with a faint, nauseating green-white light, a sickly glow that waxed and waned. It took me a moment to realize the rhythm. It was my own heartbeat. Thump-thump, pulse, thump-thump, pulse. The chamber was connected to me, monitoring my very life signs, turning my own biology into a part of its ghastly decor. And in the center of it all stood the source of the vibration, the bone tree. It was a towering, woven column of ivory and gray, a latticework of countless spines twisted together to form a trunk. Its branches were articulated limbs, and its canopy was a thick, overlapping thatch of bleached rib cages. And hanging from every branch, like grotesque Christmas ornaments, were skulls. Hundreds of them. The thrumming I felt in my bones was the tree itself, a slow, deep resonance, as if the entire structure was a lung, drawing a single, eternal breath. The faces on the skulls were not silent. Their jawbones moved in a slow, synchronized rhythm. They were singing. It was a dissonant, atonal chant, a choir of 1,000 broken voices humming a single, soul-scraping chord that seemed to bend the air around it. This wasn't a lair. It was a cathedral, and this choir was in the middle of a ritual, singing to summon something vast and terrible from the depths. From the deep shadows behind the tree, a figure stepped out. It was me. Every detail was perfect. The scuff on my left boot, the faint scar over my right eye, the grim set of my jaw. It wore my gear, held my shotgun with my posture, and had my eyes, filled with the same haunted exhaustion. The sight of it sent a jolt of pure, primal terror through me, a revulsion far deeper than anything the face stealers had inspired. I raised my shotgun, my mind racing, formulating a plan: flank it from the left, use the warped architecture as cover. A single consecrated grenade should disrupt its form. The mimic smiled. It was my smile, but it was empty, a predatory curl of the lips. "Don't bother," it said, and its voice was my own. The horror of it was absolute. It wasn't just reading my mind. It was experiencing my thoughts as I had them. Every strategy, every flicker of fear, every dawning realization. It knew it all, intimately. I ignored its words, my training overriding my terror. I fired. Not a direct shot, but a calculated blast at the ground by its feet, meant to unbalance it. As the shot rang out, the doppelganger sidestepped the spray of stone chips with an effortless grace, its movements a perfect mirror of my own intentions. But as the pellet struck the wall behind it, a searing, white-hot pain erupted across my own back, as if I'd been peppered with the shot myself. I cried out, stumbling, a phantom agony that was terrifyingly real. My breath hitched. It was connected to me. Injuring it was injuring myself. The mimic's smile widened. It saw the flash of pain in my eyes, felt the jolt of it in its own nerves. It knew. It represented the ultimate corruption of self, a perfect trap. To fight it was suicide. To hesitate was death. The line between me and the monster had dissolved. It wasn't a copy of me. It was me, wearing the wrong soul, and it was patiently waiting for me to destroy myself. The pain in my back was a phantom fire, but the terror it ignited was real. My mimic stood there, a perfect reflection of my own grim stance. My eyes filled with a chilling, patient amusement. It knew my every move before I did. It felt what I felt. To attack it was self-mutilation. The choir of skulls on the bone tree continued their dissonant chant, the low thrumming a constant reminder of the ritual I was failing to stop. How do you fight a mirror? How do you defeat an enemy who shares your own mind? The false memory of Anya's death flooded back, not as an illusion this time, but as an echo. The creature in the previous chamber had weaponized my guilt. It had fed on it. This mimic, this ultimate expression of the cave's power, was doing the same thing on a far deeper level. It wasn't just using my guilt over Anya. It was a manifestation of all of it. My failures, my regrets, every life I couldn't save, every choice that led to a darker path. That was its substance. That was its strength. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. The key wasn't to fight it. The key was to reject the very foundation it was built on. I lowered my shotgun. The mimic's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion in its eyes. "You're right," I said, my voice steady, projecting a calm I did not feel. I looked past the doppelganger, at the pulsing bone tree and its ghastly choir. "I carry it. All of it. Marco. Anya. The others." I took a breath, meeting the mimic's gaze. "But it's not yours to have." My doppelganger tilted its head. "It is what you are, Phoenix," it whispered, its voice my own, laced with seductive poison. "A collection of scars, a monument to failure." "No," I said, the word a declaration of war against my own past. "It's mine, the guilt, the pain, it belongs to me. It is not a weapon for you to wield. It is the price I pay." I looked at the stolen face of my past failures and, for the first time, I accepted them not as a source of shame, but as a part of who I was. I am not defined by my failures. I am defined by the fact that I am still standing here, fighting. I rejected it, verbally, utterly. I wasn't forgiving myself. I was claiming ownership of my own damnation. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The mimic shrieked, a sound that was both my voice and something impossibly older, a discordant scream of pure agony. The stolen faces on the bone tree's skulls twisted in horror. Their dissonant chant stuttered and died, replaced by a collective, piercing wail. The mimic's form began to unravel. Its skin, my skin, peeled away like old, sun-baked wallpaper, revealing not a featureless head, but a swirling, chaotic vortex of screaming black energy. The stolen faces of the creatures in the other chamber had been made of souls. This one was made of pure, weaponized regret. With a final implosive shriek, its form collapsed in on itself and vanished, leaving only a profound silence. My victory was short-lived. The moment the mimic's shriek faded, the deep thrumming in the chamber stopped. The pulsing light in the cymbals died. The silence that followed was not the heavy, listening quiet from before. It was the sharp, brittle silence before a cataclysm. A deep crack appeared in the stone floor, racing from the base of the bone tree directly towards me. The entire chamber floor split open, revealing a chasm of absolute, lightless depth. What rose from it was not a creature of flesh and bone, it was a wound, in reality. A shape made of impossible, shifting geometry that my mind couldn't properly resolve. It was a cascade of angles that didn't exist, a torrent of screaming, silent light, fringed with writhing tentacles of what looked like molten, flowing rock. Its presence was a psychic shockwave that slammed into me, causing a sharp, stabbing pain behind my eyes. Warm, thick blood began to pour from my nose. Its voice was not a sound, it was a feeling, a pressure, a direct transmission of knowledge that buckled my knees and threatened to shatter my sanity. So the choir falls silent. The words bloomed in my mind, vast and ancient. My curator gathered such wonderful voices for my lullaby, so much regret, so much pain. The perfect notes to sing me awake. My blood ran cold. The mimic, the face stealers. They weren't the true enemy, they were just servants. Janitors, curators, gathering a choir of guilt-ridden souls to sing their master from its slumber. I hadn't prevented a disaster. I hadn't stopped a ritual. By severing the mimic from its power source, my guilt, I had silenced the final note. I hadn't stopped the song. I had triggered its finale. I had rung the dinner bell for a god. The Leviathan's psychic voice was a physical weight, pressing the air from my lungs and the sanity from my mind. The world warped around its impossible form, stone flowing like water, the air shimmering with heatless colors. My purpose here wasn't to fight this thing. My purpose, I realized with stark clarity, was to survive it. I turned and fled. The chamber was collapsing around me, the very architecture of the place coming undone as its master awoke. Tunnels sealed behind me. Stone slabs the size of houses crashing down where I had stood moments before. The Leviathan's psychic presence was a relentless pressure at my back, a promise of total dissolution. I sprinted through the dark, my path lit by the sickly, pulsing glow of the dying symbols on the walls. The cave itself was screaming its death throes, a cacophony of groaning rock and shattering reality. I burst out of the gash in the hillside and into the cold night air of the Judean desert. I didn't stop running. I scrambled over rocks and through thorny brush, my lungs burning, the Leviathan's silent, mental scream echoing in my skull. The mountain behind me shuddered. The ground buckled, and a great crack raced up the hillside as the primordial entity began to push its way into our world. My gauntlet, dead for hours, suddenly flickered to life, its systems rebooting as I cleared the immediate zone of interference. I fumbled with the controls, my fingers slick with my own blood. "Alaric!" I yelled into the comm, my voice a ragged gasp. "Code Terminus! Bring it down! Bring the whole damn mountain down!" There was a moment of static, then Alaric's strained voice. "Phoenix? What in God's name?" "No time!" I screamed, throwing myself behind a rocky outcropping as the peak of the mountain began to fracture. "Authorization Phoenix Omega-1! Do it now!" It was a code we had never used, a protocol for a threat so far beyond our comprehension that the only solution was scorched earth. To his credit, Alaric didn't hesitate. I heard the distant, piercing shriek of fighter jets tearing through the sound barrier. 2 F-35s streaked overhead, their dark shapes silhouetted against the moon. They unleashed their payloads, and missiles screamed towards the epicenter of the chaos. But as they neared the emerging Leviathan, they didn't just explode, they were unmade. The ordnance, the fire, the very physics of the explosion seemed to unravel in the creature's presence, dissolving into harmless puffs of light and dissipated energy. Our best weapons were being erased from existence before they could even detonate. But one pilot, either through sheer luck or divine intervention, saw it. A fleeting point within the swirling vortex of impossible shapes that seemed solid. A focal point of coherent matter amidst the chaos. He adjusted his trajectory, firing his last missile. It streaked past the writhing tentacles of molten rock and struck true. The impact was silent, but the effect was absolute. The Leviathan convulsed. The psychic pressure vanished, replaced by a final, agonized broadcast that shattered the remaining windows on the jets and made my teeth ache. Its death was not an explosion, it was a collapse. The impossible geometry folded in on itself, the screaming light was sucked into a single point of absolute blackness. And then it was gone. The mountain, its heart torn out, imploded. The silence that followed was the most profound I had ever known. Where the peak had been, there was now a ragged crater. And at its center was a scar on the landscape, a patch of ground that was unnaturally black, absorbing all light, a hole in the world that induced a dizzying vertigo in anyone who looked at it. Back in Rome, the sanctum was no longer a quiet fusion of old and new, it was a buzzing global command center. The central chamber was dominated by a new map, and Dr. Eris Thorne, the division's lead theorist, stood beside Alaric. Thorne was a man who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade, his eyes wide with the frantic energy of a man whose worst nightmares were being proven true. "It's death cry," Thorne said, his voice trembling with a terrifying excitement. Was not a scream, it was a beacon, a signal. It just told the others that the warden is dead and the prison is open. He gestured to the map. It wasn't just dots and strategic markers, it was live feeds. A deep-sea camera in the Marianas Trench showed not water, but a living, expanding shadow blotting out the sun from below. Seismic sensors in the Amazon basin were no longer picking up tremors, but a slow, rhythmic pattern. The planet's lungs. It was the breathing of the earth itself. The Leviathan was just one, Alaric said, his face grim, the fear now replaced by a terrible resolve. A harbinger. They are waking up, Phoenix, all of them. He led me to an adjoining room. A new team was assembled there, a stoic Japanese woman with a cursed katana sheathed at her side. A hulking Russian who carried no visible weapons but radiated an aura of cold power. A young British psychic whose eyes were unfocused, staring at horrors only he could see. They all looked at me, and I saw the same haunted, hollowed-out look in their eyes that I knew was in my own. We were the survivors. The ones who had stared into the abyss and hadn't blinked. My mission in the cave was over. I hadn't prevented a disaster. I had fired the starting gun for the apocalypse. My name is Phoenix, and this is the story of how my war ended and how our war began. It is not a story of hope. It is a story of resolve, a grim, desperate stand against a tide of incomprehensible, world-ending titans. And we are all that stands in their way.